Hi, I'm Steve Hayes, and I'm a pastor, and I'm a sinner. And I love stories. I love to hear people's stories. I love to hear how God has worked in their lives to help change them and make them who they are. And I think we all need to hear those kinds of stories. So I hope you'll enjoy it and listen along with This Is My Story.
I am Erika Housely, and this is my story.
All right, well, we're here with Erika Housely, one of my favorite people. Erika's been coming to our church for a while. Always has this just joyful way about her, which is it's unusual. Unfortunately, you don't see too many people walking around with joy. But Erika is a pretty amazing person. So I wanted y'all to be able to have a chance to hear her story. Let's start out, Erika. You have this awesome dog named Heidi.
Yes, I do.
Tell everybody about your dog.
She is a long-haired American German Shepherd. She is from West Virginia. We drove out there to pick her up. She is about 89 pounds, and she is the most obedient and well-behaved dog ever.
She's huge.
She is huge, but she's
how much does
giant.
she weigh?
89 pounds.
89 pounds. Holy cow.
She seems to be pretty intimidating to other people, but I think she's just a big bear, sweet bear that loves hugs.
That's exactly what she looks like. A bear. That's probably why she's intimidating. Oh my gosh, you have a bear in your house.
Pretty much.
But have you always loved big dogs?
Yes, I think that big dogs are the best. They seem intimidating, but they're just big babies all the way around.
Well, Heidi's a sweetheart.
She is. Thank you.
She definitely got my attention.
Yes.
She's just so big. Where are you from? You have this great accent. I don't know that I've ever talked to you about where you're from.
I think you have. I'm originally from Mexico City. I grew up going to a bilingual school down there, so I had a British accent originally. So it was really funny because when I first came to the United States, people thought I was American, and then they would hear my accent and they're like, you must be from Europe. And I'm like, no, try south of the border.
Yeah, because it is different.
It is different.
It's definitely, you got definitely a Latin thing going, but it's a little different. Mm-hmm. That's cool.
That's because I have Texan and British and, Mexican accent all together.
So Mexico City.
Mexico City.
And then when did you come to the States?
I came for a 2-week vacation back in August of 1987, and my mom tricked me and enrolled me in school because her friends just encouraged her to do that, and she did. She brought all my paperwork, and she tricked me, and here I am.
Vacation that never ended.
That's right.
Do you still feel like you're on vacation?
No.
The vacation is over. Huh?
Very much so.
Well, I'm glad you made it here.
Me too.
And how'd you end up in Corsicana?
Well, we have an electrical contracting company, small, but we were doing a lot of work down in Houston, and we lived in McKinney, and it was a long ride down to Houston or coming back, and we still had local work going on, so it seemed like it was the right place to be at the time for what we were doing.
Awesome.
So that's
awesome. So the real reason that you're here is to tell a little bit about your story of how you came to Jesus and what that has been like in your life. So when did you come to faith? When did you first come to faith? Did you grow up in a religious home?
I did. My mom took me to a Pentecostal church when I was very young. From there, we went to a non-denominational church that was actually based, it was a home church from Christ for the Nations from up here in Dallas area.
Okay.
And that's actually where I got saved. I was 8 years old, and I was convicted. I actually grew up in my elementary school years. I went to a Catholic school. Okay. And it was just a little bit of conflict there because things were different and they didn't seem right. But the reason I went there is because it was a private school, of course, and I had a scholarship for it. Okay. So it was good, academics and everything. So therefore I went there because my parents wanted that for me. However, my my real saving time was about 8 years old. And then when I came here, I started going to a Baptist church with the family we were staying with, and I got baptized at 14 years old. And I've been, going to church pretty much ever since I was a little girl.
So it was your faith story is kind of like your life story. Like you have a lot of different influences there.
Yes, definitely.
And there comes a time in everybody's life where it's not so much about all the influences anymore. It's not mom's faith or the Catholic Church's faith or the Baptist Church's faith or the Assembly's faith or whatever. It's your faith.
Correct.
When did you really feel like you embraced it for you and said, this is what I believe, this is what I'm going with?
I think at an early age, I wanted to just... I felt in my heart that it was a simple thing for me to do, because I felt that if I believed what the Bible said, then I had to embrace it all the way. And, in the Bible it says that if you have the faith of a child, then, you'll be able to just have Jesus with you like all the time. And so therefore I decided, I used to see my mom very worried and concerned constantly. And I couldn't process in my mind why, if she believed in Jesus and he was our father, why would she be worried constantly? And I didn't want to grow up that way. Yeah. So I decided that I would put my trust in Jesus no matter what the circumstances, because I didn't want to grow up being a worrywart. Very much so. That's probably the answer.
And you're not.
I'm not.
And so you feel like that's a direct result of Jesus in your life, that you don't have to feel a lot of worry and anxiety about every little thing?
Correct. I drive people crazy around me usually because they're concerned about stuff, and I'm like, hey, God's in control, and that's how things, he'll take care of it one way or another. What
a gift. So, that's awesome.
Thank you.
That's awesome. So that has been tested tremendously, especially over the last couple of years.
Very much so.
When I met you, you were married to a great guy named Steve, and just a real cool guy. Y'all were just a real cool couple. It took us a little while to get to know Steve and to get to see his personality, because he's not one of those just come out and make a splash kind of guys. But once I got to know him, it was awesome. He's just an awesome guy. But Steve got cancer and became very sick and eventually passed away.
Correct.
What was that battle? I know it's hard to talk about, but what was that battle like for you? What did you learn through that time, and in particular as it relates to your faith? How did, everything you just talked about how you came to faith and how you trusted Jesus and how he gives you freedom from worry. How did all of that get put to the test through everything that you've been through?
Growing up, one of my favorite verses, and the one that really has gotten me through everything, is Matthew 6, where it talks about God taking care of the birds, and they never have to worry about whether they're going to eat the next day or anything like that. So I always related that to my life. So I figured that if God cares so much about the birds, and I knew how much more he cared about us humans, and, he sent his own son to die on the cross for us. So therefore, I knew how important it was to him. And when Steve started feeling sick and we went to the doctor and we found out that he was diagnosed with mesothelioma, which for those of you who may not know, it's cancer, a rare type of cancer that is caused by asbestos exposure, and it could take anywhere from 20 to 50 years to develop in the lungs. So it's a long process, and that's why a lot of times it's misdiagnosed at the beginning of the symptoms. So he went through a couple of surgeries before we were actually he was actually diagnosed with what was really going on with his with him and with his body. And overall, he was in really, really good health, other than the little pain he had on the side. which he was originally diagnosed with gallbladder problems. So they were getting ready to take his gallbladder out.
Okay.
And it didn't seem quite right because he was not having the reaction from people that have had gallbladder problems that I have met or know. And you can't even come close to the area because it's just so painful.
Right.
So we went to a couple other different doctors. Like I said before, we got the full diagnosis. And on September 8th of 2018, we got the results from the biopsy. And the doctor walked in and he was very frustrated and sad and gave us the awful news that it was mesothelioma. Of course, at that time, we had no idea what that meant. We were completely taken by surprise, and we just weren't sure where we would go from there because we didn't know that much about what it was.
Right.
So immediately we started researching. Of course, nowadays with the phone and access to the internet, you just kind of have access to pretty much all types of information, you know.
Yeah.
The doctor.
So you're going through all this, but you're also running a business together.
Yes.
You're raising a daughter.
Yes.
And life is still moving.
Yes.
At a rapid pace.
Correct.
How'd you deal with all this?
It was tough, especially because all his doctors were up in McKinney, where we used to live, and we had to travel an hour and 15 minutes to any doctor's appointments or any kind of procedure he had. However, the doctor that was, dealing with Steve and gave us a diagnosis, he suggested that we went down to Houston for the doctor that was pioneering into mesothelioma treatment. So, of course, we had to go down to Houston. We immediately set that up, which was about a week later after Steve got out of the hospital in McKinney. And we had a really good guy working for us that we could trust that he was continuing the business and continuing taking care of our customers the way, he knew Steve wanted to take care of them.
Yeah, so as weird as it sounds, in the middle of all that, things falling apart, there were a lot of things that fell into place too.
Correct. We saw God's hand through it all because my mom was up here from Mexico. She lives with us when she's here. And when she's in Mexico, of course, she's at her house there. But she was here throughout all that. And so my daughter was basically at home with my mom. So I have my 80-year-old mom taking care of my, at the time, 13-year-old daughter.
And your mom is pretty energetic and delightful in a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways, yes.
Yeah. So that's a real blessing.
So it was a blessing. I mean, we saw God's hand from the beginning because everything that was going on was falling into place step by step,
But, and I was there with you through some of that.
Yes.
But it was awful.
It was awful. It was something that we didn't think would happen because through all the testing that they did down in Houston, we were there for 2 days doing nothing but testing, between blood testing through heart, functioning, and it was kind of funny because the cardiologist came and was going to, take a look at Steve and the results from the EKG and all that stuff, and asked Steve to take his shirt off, and he does. And the cardiologist was a nice-looking, fit man, and he goes, "Wow, man, you have the heart of like an 18-year-old, so you should be nothing but, good to go." So they were giving us a lot of hope the whole time. His health was well, other than that, and he was strong. They wanted him to do the stress test running on a treadmill they wanted him to be there like 7 minutes, and he blew him out of the water because he was on there for like 12 minutes.
So did you struggle with, you're getting some mixed messages because Steve is very clearly still declining as far as his energy and his,
So it took from September 8th to his passing, which was 4 months and 1 day later. Wow. And it was very quick. The first couple of weeks after the diagnosis, we were very hopeful up until the time that we went back down to Houston. They did a biopsy in a couple of his lymph nodes to make sure that everything was clear. And unfortunately, the doctor came back and told us that he had spread. So therefore, it took Steve out of the, probability of getting surgery. So that was when we really had the grimmest news at the time.
Yeah.
And nothing we could do about it other than pray and have faith.
So were you shocked when he died?
I was shocked, but throughout the whole process, we held on to our faith, and we knew that God had a plan for our lives, his life, my life, and we knew that no matter what, that he would not leave me or leave my family. So we held on to that very dearly and very tight. So that's how we got through it. And we saw different people, friends from different areas, and of course our church family, and that's how we got through, because we saw God was taking care of us.
And yet there have been moments where I've seen you after church, or there have been moments where there's been tears, there's been the heartache of it all. Talk a little bit about that.
Tears come from a way of, just memories, because the first time coming into church without him was hard. You were right there to hug me and to tell me it would be okay. And sitting at our regular spot and singing the songs I could hear him singing in my head. But it was also peaceful knowing that he was no longer in pain, because the last few weeks, and you got to see him probably about 2 weeks before his passing, and you saw that the shape and what his body was turning into was just awful.
Yeah.
And he was suffering a lot. So it was hard.
Yeah, it was hard, and it still is. I remember my dad died, 42 years ago, and I always say, I wasn't ready for it then, and I'm not ready for it now. It's just one of those things you never feel ready for.
Nope.
Emotionally. But you continue on, and you have still doing the business.
Yes.
Still raising your daughter, still coming to church, helping in the sound booth. How do you keep going after something like that?
Because I still know in my heart that God has a plan, and that if our story gives somebody hope, then that's what it's going to be. It's for God's glory, because at the end, it's not on my own. I could have never done it without the strength from him, and without him putting people in place for support, emotional support, and all kinds of friends and hugs and that type of stuff. So I know that we're not alone, and I know that that I gotta keep going. I mean, he wouldn't want it any other way anyways.
Yeah.
So.
And you got Heidi.
And I got Heidi. So.
The big dog to keep you company.
That's right. It was a tough year. It was very tough. But I was grateful every day. Every morning I wake up and I thank God for giving me another day to continue doing what we do.
Well, you're a pretty amazing person. And you give all of us who have seen you go through this a ton of encouragement and strength. And so I appreciate you sharing your story with us. Thanks for taking the time, especially to talk about the difficult stuff. I know that's hard, but there are a lot of people out there who are facing real difficult circumstances, especially when it comes to grief. And so I think your story is going to be a real healing thing for them. So appreciate
I hope it helps somebody, because I know that we all go through hard times, one time or another, but God's amazing, and he's right there waiting for us to reach out when we need him and to be grateful for what he gives us. So that's the way we keep going.
Amazing. Appreciate you, girl. Love you.
Love you too. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe. And if you'd like to spread the word, please consider leaving a 5-star review and tell your friends to subscribe too. Our video podcast is available on our Grace Community Church YouTube channel. This Is My Story is produced and engineered by Jake Moore and is a ministry of Grace Community Church in Corsicana, Texas. The views and opinions expressed on this show are those of the speaker and do not necessarily express the views of Grace Community Church. Thanks for listening.